We invite the participants in this session to come up and have a short discussion on the panel. Now, we had one question we didn't quite get to. I think you had a question?
A comment as to the other question about how could, there was a quote from Hebrews.
Yeah.
And the question was, how can Alma be quoting Hebrews when Paul came along a couple centuries later? Well, the same question could be asked about Moroni's charity chapter.
Well, yeah.
Which sounds like, on those two, Moroni comes several centuries after Paul, but they're, worlds apart. The assumption is that what Paul said is the original. And that can't always be assumed. Who's Paul quoting?
Well, I don't take that approach. I believe that the King James Bible influences the translation throughout, and phraseology from the King James Bible is woven in the text. A number of people have been writing about this, called intertextuality, but the translator, the translation has a very close knowledge of the King James style and the writing, and it's not just in those that you mentioned, it's throughout the text. And it isn't Joseph Smith just flipping through his Bible and finding things that he wants to deal with. I know that early on people tried to say, well, this must mean there's a proto-text for Paul, this language and so forth. But I think when you look at all of the phraseology, you just have to say that the translation is freewheeling. And it's like if I were translating my own knowledge, perhaps of the scriptures, would just, it would become a part of the actual translation, so that I don't think it's as literal of what's on the plates as some of us, we've assumed. So I don't think there's any anachronism or anything. I've been arguing the language of the Book of Mormon is early modern English, and therefore it's going to have a huge influence from the King James Bible throughout. So,
but when you get quotes, like the charity chapter, are so close to what Paul said, I think it was Dr. Nibley that quoted sources way before Paul's time in the Middle Eastern world that said similar things that Paul may have been borrowing from, and Moroni may have had access to those in the brass plates.
Yep. Well, I like God to be the source, And if he can translate using the King James language, I don't have a problem with it. But, some people got to find a proto, something back to 600 BC or something. I don't think you have to.
Any members of the panel who feel so moved, just jump in and comment on these matters if you wish.
Just interrupt.
I think it could be a common ancient source. We don't know, but certainly it could also be divine inspiration, where God is revealing the same thing to two of his servants. We don't know.
If you have any other comments in the audience, we have a microphone out there, or you can feel free to put your question on a card. Yes, sir.
Well, not in detail. I mean, I knew of him. He was, right. No, I haven't. No.
All of this has come to the fore since the passing of Dr. King.
I haven't found Shakespeare particularly.
I worked for Dr. King, and he did mention Chiasmus as one of many figures that the scriptures are rich with. And he was aware of the Chiasmus research before he passed away.
Well, I don't think he ever had an opportunity to comment on the early modern English content of the Book of Mormon because no one had at that time recognized it. Yes. I wish he had written on the subject. That's what we were talking about just now.
Well, one of the problems you have to deal with is the current text has been edited, and many of the early modern English expressions are missing, so they're not there to be discovered. The grammar has been surfaced down, so you can't see it. But things like but if, meaning unless, and departed, meaning to part, I think he would have recognized those if he'd been reading maybe, the printer's manuscript or something like that. But, without that, I myself didn't notice it for a long time until it was sort of forced upon me.
Yes, this is a question for Dr. Parry. In regards to the relationship to the MT text and the Dead Sea Scroll, there is some views that perhaps some of the MT text has changed some of the original Isaiah to make it a little less conducive for Christian interpretation of Isaiah. And I can't remember some of the passages on my hand by memory right now, but I was wondering whether any of the work you've been doing sort of aids or goes against that sort of viewpoint.
There is evidence of textual changes in Isaiah 53, which is a great chapter on the atonement of Jesus Christ. And there's a verb that the Isaiah scroll makes more clear. It's halal. It means to pierce or to profane. And when you pierce, according to the law of Moses, Leviticus 15, you're also profane. So if you have blood flowing from you, you're also profane. And there's a verb in Isaiah 53 that is unclear in the Masoretic text, but it's more clear in the Isaiah scroll. But we don't see any evidence. I don't think any Christian or Jewish scholar sees evidence of textual tampering with the Masoretic text to de-Christianize it.
Yes, ma'am.
I wonder at what point, Dr. Perry, did you become involved with the Dead Sea Scrolls?
I became...
Or saw a television program on the fact that a scholar from another religion, and I won't mention it, had sat on the scrolls for a long time. So how did you get involved with it?
In January of 1994, I was invited by the editor-in-chief of the Dead Sea Scrolls translation team, his name is Emmanuel Tove, to become a member of the international team of translators. So 1994, so it's been several years, and I've published maybe 10 or 12 books on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And
So your reputation preceded you?
no,
And you were called to do that?
no is an act of God. I'm totally serious. I look back and I see God's hand in it, and it's a huge blessing for me and my family. But I've taken it, and I've given a lot of presentations to worldwide groups, and as Bob mentioned, the last several years I've been also on the international team of the Dead Sea Scrolls Foundation. It's a Jerusalem team, so it's a blessing from God.
Well, was this that I either read or saw, was this accurate, that the original people involved with the scrolls kind of sat on them and didn't do anything with them for years?
Let me rephrase that. I guess everyone heard that sounds a little like a conspiracy theory.
Right, which I usually don't buy into.
That does not exist. However, there were a couple of scholars who wanted to publish large amounts of scrolls. And the team was expanded greatly under the direction of Emmanuel Tove. So some scholars just had so much on their plate to do, and they couldn't publish the huge amounts that needed to be published. So that's the proper answer.
Then I shall wipe that from my memory.
Bob, the guy over here.
Can you share any thoughts you might have on why the Lord chose early modern English?
Well, I don't know. And a lot of people want me to answer that question, and I'm studying it. And Stan Carmack is helping me, and we're gonna publish a book next few months, part 3 of the critical text of the Book of Mormon, part 3 of volume 3, that'll go through the whole language, showing all the phrases, the words, and some of the syntax that all derives from early modern English, not from Joseph Smith's time. Joseph Smith is not the translator of the text. The evidence is really very strong for this. A lot of people want me to explain why, and at one time I foolishly suggested there was a translation committee. That was a mistake, because first of all, it gets in the way. Everybody wants to know who's on the translation committee, and it just gets in the way. The real question is, what's this language of this text like? So that's what we're studying, and it's going to be made available, and you can study it yourself. And a lot of people have a lot of views, but they're not studying it. And someday you can ask the Lord. He'll tell you how he did it. But I myself don't know, and I think it just gets in the way. And so I take back my statement. I put it in print even. The Lord or his translation committee, it was dumb. Because everybody wants to know. People are out there on the internet saying William Tyndale was on the translation committee. Well, God. Be nice, but I don't think he was, but I don't know. This is just dumb. It doesn't go anywhere. So you've got to study the text itself, and that's what, that's true of everything. I think that's what Don's work was showing today. When we look at the Masoretic text versus the Isaiah, the Great Scroll, we're just going to look at both of them. We're going to study it out. We're going to see where Chiasmus was violated. That's what he showed today, I think, over and over. Are there any examples? But I have a question. Are there examples the other way around?
Yes, there are, and I ran out of time. So,
Well,
yeah, but for the most part, the Masoretic text presents the better readings, in my opinion, in my judgment. Having gone through every word in the both Hebrew texts. Every word. I've spent years. I started in 1998 on this project.
That's good. Well, but that's what Don's doing. He's not trying to prove anything per se. He's going to study it out and lay down the evidence. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I know I'm not answering your question because I can't answer it. But we can study this text, and it's astounding. It's an astounding text.
The information is simply too new, and it's a result of basic research. The Book of Mormon Critical Text Project was conceived many years ago, and no one knew where it would lead. And I think all of us are very surprised at the conclusions of Dr. Skousen and Dr. Carmack. I think they're surprised as well. I don't know how to explain it. I've never heard a good explanation yet, but that just goes to show you what the results of basic research can be. And the same thing applies to the study of the Dead Sea Scrolls. You do not know at the outset what you're going to find. It's a voyage of discovery.
I need to clarify one point. I started with the scrolls in 94, and then I just said I've been working on this since 98. 94, I started on the books of Samuel. 98 on the books of Isaiah. So I'm not contradicting myself. 94, Samuel. 98, Isaiah.
Well, I'm going to ask a question of you. I want you to talk about Samuel because I think textually it's the most difficult of all. So you worked with Cross, right? So tell us a little bit about it.
Of all the books of the Bible, I'm guessing this is what you might mean. Of all the books of the Hebrew Bible, the book of Samuel in the Masoretic text maybe has the greatest conflict. And the Dead Sea Scrolls book of Samuel, it's called 4Q Samuel A. So K4 of Qumran, the book of Samuel, the largest book, is It's aligned with the Septuagint readings. This is a little complex, but it does present some passages that clarify the Masoretic text of Samuel, although some of the readings are controversial. You always have controversial readings.
Well, they gave you the tough one.
They gave me the tough one.
I have
I
one
just
more,
ask?
one more comment. On the relationship of the translation to the early English text. That was astounding, Brother Skousen, when that came to light. And how could that be? And so that the thought that crossed my mind again, that I still can't dismiss it, is that the text of the Book of Mormon was being prepared by Moroni, perhaps, and his team earlier in preparation for Joseph Smith. And that that earlier period then, we look at that period of time, there was a preparation going on in the spirit world or wherever for the text that would communicate in this time in Joseph Smith's life.
Yeah, I think I want to make a comment about that. Some people, some people would say, okay, so there's early modern English stuff in here, therefore it was done during that period of time. However, what's really interesting, if you go pull out a book written in 1550 or 60 or something like that, about every other sentence or more, you're going to have to look up a word. You're not going to know what it means. Actually, when we read the Isaiah portions in the Bible, in the Book of Mormon, we get the same problem. What are carbuncles? What are wimples? We got to look them up. Well, they're old, though. They're dead. What's a besom of destruction? Oliver thought it was the bosom of destruction. Well, yeah, it's a broom. But, he didn't know. The point is, so that's the Isaiah, that's in the King James. It's got vocabulary we don't understand. But the rest of the Book of Mormon, even the words which are archaic, are still in English but have different meanings. It's understandable. So it isn't just being produced by some people, say, back in 1600, and it's sitting there. Because if that had happened, there would be words throughout the Book of Mormon we would not understand at all. We have to look them up, just like in the Isaiah portions. So what has happened is this text is prepared for Joseph Smith's time so that when he reads off a word, the word will be a word of English, even though the meaning may be different. When he says departed or but if means unless. When he says but still exists and if exists, but if as alone doesn't exist, but when he dictates it, Oliver can write it down. So there's some kind of oversight that's going on up to Joseph Smith's time. It isn't being done in the past and just sitting there waiting, So there's more of the intervention of some aspect of this. That's a realization I came to, studying out this text. There were no weird words. Because Stan Carmack was reading me something from Harshfield, who wrote a book about Sir Thomas More, and started reading sentences. And I said, what's that word mean? Well, we had to go look them up. So that was, I think that's an important finding. So whatever it is, there's oversight by the Lord right up to Joseph Smith's time, I think. But they didn't go in and just wipe out everything either. And then I don't know why. You would say, okay, come on, Lord. Why are you making it difficult? Well,
One last question. This is for Dr. Seeley.
yes, he needs to have a question. He's following us.
Somebody was asking me a question earlier, and I thought you might have an opinion on this. Since the Book of Deuteronomy comes out in the lifetime of Lehi, what do you suppose his opinion of it was, based on what you know about the Book of Mormon? The Deuteronomic revolution, how did Lehi take that?
Well, it's an interesting question because the theology of the Book of Mormon is really, really close to Deuteronomy. It's not a single quotation from Deuteronomy in the Book of Mormon, but there's lots of ideas that way. In terms of theology also, the central tenet of Deuteronomy is the centralization of the cult in chapter 12, and Lehi doesn't pay much attention to that when he leaves. So Jeremiah is a little bit in the same boat. He has lots of ideas from Deuteronomy, but there's lots of places where he diverges too. So I would guess Lehi is somewhere in that camp.
He's old school, is that what you, would you say he's old school?
Whatever old school is. The conversation is actually more complicated because of the Margaret Barker trend in the church, which has sort of made Deuteronomy the bad guy, right?
How do you feel about Margaret Barker and Kevin Christensen's
Well, I mean, it's
interpretation
interesting
of it?
because the Book of Mormon actually has things that could both support Margaret Barker and also goes against Margaret Barker. So I'm not totally convinced by her arguments. I find them intriguing, right? But I think the jury's still out with Margaret Barker.
Thank you very much.